So welcome to a beginner's guide on how to get into Unity for the first time. Now, I have made other Unity guides on my channel which were more focused on, how to get started making a 2D game or how to, do various things inside the Unity software, both in 2D and 3D. But they haven't really been focusing that much on, as an absolute beginner, if you want to get into Unity, what is the correct learning path when it comes to learning Unity for the first time. And of course, there's many different ways you can learn getting into Unity. There's many different paths you can take, but I thought I would give my version of the path that I recommend taking when you want to learn how to use Unity for the first time. So I'm going to assume that most of you sitting here are complete beginners. You've never used Unity before, and I will try to explain as simple as possible. We have a saying in Danish where we say like the 10 cent has to fall, which basically means that when you learn something, it's not enough just to study it. You actually have to have that final realization of, oh, so that's why we do the thing that we do. So I'll do my best to make you not just know, but actually understand the reasoning behind the things that we're doing, so you actually know how to build stuff on your own in the future. Because that is really the final goal here. You want to be able to build games on your own, just like think up some sort of idea that you want to create and then get started on creating it. Having said that, as you can see, I have both Unity and Unity Hub open in front of me here. And it's very important to point out that if you do not already have Unity installed or have no idea how to get started installing Unity, I do have a how to install Unity video, which will not be over there, but down there in the description of this video here. So you can just watch that and then return to this video, and then, you'll be caught up with what we're doing here. So with that said, let's go ahead and check out what I have already in front of me here. What I've basically done is inside Unity Hub, which is really the thing that you start out installing when you want to get into Unity for the first time. You have all your different projects inside this tab here called Projects. You can also learn things about Unity, which Unity provides for you, which is a great place to start learning. You have a community page, and then you also have a Installs tab, which is where you have all the different installations of Unity that you have installed on your computer. So as you can see, I actually have two versions here. I have a older version and I have a newer version. And I actually want to demonstrate something for you because as you can see, I have a project open right now, which is called Unity Scripting Tutorial, which is right now using the latest version that I installed of Unity. And inside this window, I have moved around my components a little bit. I have, this is not the default layout that you get the first time you install Unity and then open it up. So I just really quickly want to go through what I did here. And then I also want to show how to fix a particular error message that you might receive, because I know some people when they install Unity, or maybe they've had an older version of Unity installed on their computer, and then when they go into their package manager and they start updating the different aspects of Unity, for example, the PSD importer or, the 2D animation package, they start updating things and then all of a sudden it throws error messages that you can't fix. So I'll show how to fix that too if that's an error you run into. And I'll tell you when I'm going to show it to you, so you can just skip past it if you don't get any sort of errors and you don't really care about it. It's really up to you. But just to kind of show it, inside my Unity editor here, I have the default windows. I have the scene and the game view over here. The scene view, of course, is where we basically just see our game. So this is a 2D game that I opened up, and this is my 2D environment. I can also switch over to 3D if I want to by clicking this little button up here in the corner. I can move around inside my scene. If I hold down the middle mouse button, I can go up and down, left and right. If I hold down the right mouse button, I can look around by panning the camera. And if I scroll the mouse wheel, I can zoom in and out. If you want to be a complete expert, you can hold down the, the right mouse button and use WASD to fly around inside your scene, which is kind of cool, or WE if you want to go up and down. So that's some shortcuts you can use if you want to know how to navigate your scene. Of course, when it comes to the 2D view, we don't have the same luxury because it's in 2D and not 3D, but if you want to know how to navigate, that's how you can do it. I do also have my hierarchy over here on the right side, and you can actually see as a default, it is going to be on the left side over here when you start Unity for the first time. I like to move it over to the right here just by dragging it. You can just move it around, move it over here instead. And that's just simply because the hierarchy is where you have all the game objects that is inside your scene. So all the stuff inside your game basically goes inside this little window here. If you have trees or player model or enemies or anything like that, it is going to show inside this hierarchy window here. When you click them, just one of them, like for example the camera that I have open right now, you can see we have the inspector over here. And the inspector is basically just a place where we can see all the different components and properties of this particular game object. So for example, the main camera, or if I right click and then create a 2D object, a sprite and a square, I can actually see the square over here inside my scene. And then you can see we also have some components and properties inside the inspector for that particular game object, which was created right here. So you can see the camera has some properties and components, and the square has some different ones. So, you can actually see and mess around with the settings of this particular game object. If I want to move it, I can do that over here. We can actually right click on the transform component and say reset, and then we can move it around. We can also rotate it if we wanted to. We can also scale it if that's what we want to do. There's a lot of things we can do inside the inspector here. But it's just to kind of show that the inspector is over here on the right side, right next to the hierarchy window, because they kind of go together, so to speak. I do also have at the bottom here my project window, which as a default is actually combined with the console, so it looks like this. I recommend taking your project window, moving it over here, just so you can see your projects, and you can also see the console over here on the right side, because the console is going to be very important to you. The project window is going to show all the different assets you have inside your game, which is basically all the things that you use inside your game. All the stuff inside the hierarchy window is what is currently inside your active scene, and a scene is basically like a level or something inside your game. So this is a level called sample scene, I believe. I'm going to have my scenes folder down here, which you can't see, so I'll just move it over here so you can see it. I have a sample scene inside my scenes folder, inside my assets folder, which, by the way, you're going to spend pretty much all your time inside the assets folder. And this is called sample scene, which is the one I have open right here. Then all the different game objects that is active inside the scene, like the camera, so we can actually see something, which is actually a little square you can see here. You can see if I go into my camera, I can change the sizing of my camera, so you can see this is actually the camera, and you can see a small preview down here in the corner just to kind of see what is going on. So basically this is a scene, and these are the objects that are inside your scene. But this down here is your entire gaming project. This could be other scenes as well. This could be all the different assets and sprites or materials. It could be animations. Anything you use inside your entire gaming project is going to be inside this little folder down here called assets. So if I were to drag this over again, just so we have some order. The console window, which is over here, is basically where you're going to receive any kind of error message inside your game. And the console is basically going to be your best friend and your worst enemy, because you kind of hope that you don't see any messages inside the console, but if any messages like error messages do appear, luckily it does tell you what is wrong, so you can very quickly fix it again. So you really don't want any messages in here unless you're told it to, but it does help you fix the errors if they do actually appear. So the console is something that some people think is a little bit scary because it's a technical aspect of the Unity game engine, but it's also something that is very important to learn. Now, as you probably noticed, I do also have some windows in here that you don't have if you just opened up your Unity project for the first time, which is I have let's actually go and start over here. I have, first of all, a project settings tab, which is something that you will mess around with from time to time when it comes to all sorts of things like the graphics or, the quality of the scene or the quality of the game when you view it. There's going to be many things in here that you at a later point want to mess around with. So I recommend opening up the project settings window, which you can do by going to edit, then go down to where it says project settings. When you click that, it's going to open up in a window and just sort of dock it over here next to the inspector. Same thing goes for preferences, which I have next to it here. It's the same deal. You go into edit, go down to preferences, which is right underneath project settings, opens up, and then you just sort of dock it over here next to the project settings. I do also have an asset store window tab, which some people would argue is not really like why would I have that? Because the asset store, which is a place where you can download free assets or pay for assets if you want to use something inside your game, was at some point in the past, back when I learned Unity for the first time, was a thing that was inside the engine itself. So this window here would actually have the asset store inside of it. So you could then download assets or buy them and then have them inside your project. But now they changed it so you can search online. So if I click this, it's going to open up inside my browser. I just think this is kind of a neat shortcut to have available inside the game engine. So I just like to have this open. You can open that by going to Window, and then going down to Asset Store, and then you can just sort of dock it over there. It's not really necessary, but if you want to have the Asset Store available, you can just sort of have it over there. Besides that, I do also have some animation windows. So if I go down to animation here, you can see we have animation and animator. I recommend opening both. And then I simply dock the animator up here next to my scene and game tabs. So I can then mess around with the different animation states that I create inside my game. An animation state is basically, if I create an animation for idle, for my player, for example, where he's just standing, he's not really doing anything, he's just kind of like bobbing up and down. But then I might also have a run animation with my player, so he starts running, so we have a run animation. The animator up here basically allow for you to transition between the different animations that you have, which we call states. Whereas the animation tab, which I dock down here at the bottom, simply allow for you to create the animations that you want to create for your game. So if I have, sprites, I can then, have different frames for my sprite animation. I can then put them in here and then animate my character and do things, and then I can change the states up here. So these two kind of go together, so I like to have them in separate windows so I can see both of them at the same time. And again, it's just very important to note here that the way I've set up my windows here are basically just my personal preference. You can do it in any sort of way that you want to, and it is just going to be, perfectly fine. I do have one more thing that I recommend doing. If you go into your game view up here in the top, you can see that this is what we have currently inside our game. And as you can see, it's just blue. That's basically because we set the background color for our scene inside the main camera to be blue. If I wanted this to be a different color, I could just sort of change it here. If I wanted a white game or something, as a background color, I can just simply do it in there. One thing that I do recommend doing is going up to your the scaling of your game view and set it to full HD 1920 by 1080. Because if you're developing for a monitor, which you're most likely doing, because I don't think you're making a mobile game right now, then this is going to show the aspect ratio of the game view in a proper way. So, this, I think here, this is not the default one. I think this one might be the default one, which isn't quite what you want to have. So, 1920 by 1080 is properly scaled for a regular monitor. So having that up there is something I recommend doing. And with that said, you basically have everything that I have inside my Unity Inspector. Actually, before we continue, there is one more window that I forgot about, which is actually very important to have open, which is the Package Manager that I docked down here at the bottom here. If you go to Window, you can see Package Manager right here. And basically, Package Manager is the place where you're going to keep all your packages inside Unity updated, as well as installing new packages that you might want to have inside your Unity project. So this is the place to do that. Now, when it comes to opening up Unity for the first time, when you go into Package Manager, you're going to notice that some of these are going to have this little arrow next to them, which basically means that they're out of date and they could use an update. However, you might encounter an error message when you try to update these packages down here. And this is really something that depends on if you're using the latest version of Unity or if you're using an older version of Unity. If you just installed the latest stable build of Unity, you shouldn't receive any error messages when you try to update all these packages here. But some of you, if you're using an older version of Unity, you will receive an error message where it says, oh, there's some, inside the console is going to tell you, oh, some package is receiving an error when you try to update it. The way to fix that, just to kind of show you, and again, you can skip this little tiny section, which I do show in the timeline under the video. So if you don't want to see this part because you didn't receive an error message, then you can just sort of skip past this if you want to. But for people who might receive this error, basically, the packages that you updated inside your package manager are a later version that is only compatible with the later version of Unity. So that's why it's making the error message. So the way to fix that is, first of all, just update all the packages you have in here. Then afterwards, you go into Unity Hub, go down to Installs, and make sure that you add a later version of Unity, which is the recommended release up here. So you can actually see this is 2023-26 F1, which is actually a one number later than my latest version I have installed, but this one is fine. It's going to work fine for now. So make sure you add a new version, and you could delete some of the older versions, uninstalling them if you want to, if you don't have space on your computer, but just be aware that if you have projects already that has been created based on the older version of Unity, they might receive error messages if you try to open them up in the newest version of Unity. And that's why we have different installs on our computer, because if I made some older games that rely on this particular version of Unity, and then I try to open it in a later version, it might start crashing and do all sorts of error things, and that's just not a good thing. So just be aware of that removing and uninstalling older versions is not always the best idea. It really depends if you have projects to rely on it. So with that said, if you added a newer version of Unity, make sure that you close down your current Unity that you open in the background here, close it down, go into projects, and then reopen it, but click the Unity version and make sure you select the highest version that you just installed. Then when you reopen Unity, you can go back inside Package Manager, and then it's going to have some new ones for you to update, and then you just update them, and then the error message is going to be gone. So that's simply how to fix that. So with that said, you might be sitting here and you'd never used Unity before, and now we just went through all these windows, and you might have been overwhelmed a little bit because, you have to learn all these windows right now, like what they do and how to use them. Just take a breath and just relax, because it's really more simple than it might appear if some of you are sitting there getting overwhelmed. And that might be discouraging to hear if you're already confused about Unity, but just know that it is of course going to be confusing and overwhelming because this is your first time in here. Everyone who has ever started out as a game developer felt the same way when you started out. So it's just very important to keep in mind that you just got to take one step at a time, one small victory a day, and eventually you'll get there. So let's talk a bit about what exactly you're going to start out with, because now you have Unity open, so now what? Essentially, before you can do anything inside your game engine, because we have to start creating games, right? And you could always just right click over here in the hierarchy and then, go to 2D object, sprites, and then you could create maybe a circle, create a football type game, or maybe the ping pong, where you have these bars that pushes the ball back and forward, just to come with some simple game examples. But you can't create any sort of game without creating logic inside your game. Logic is what makes the game function, basically. If you want the ball to start moving, you have to have some sort of logic inside a script, for example, inside some code that tells the ball to keep going, when it gets pushed around, or maybe to move around the little ping pong bars that pushes the ball back and forward. There needs to be some logic inside some code to tell those bars when you press W, S, or up and down on your keyboard, then these need to move up and down. There has to be some sort of logic before you can start creating a game, which means that yes, you will need to learn how to program inside Unity. Programming inside Unity is fairly, and now I should be careful about what I say. I do want to say it's fairly simple, because C#, which is the programming language that we use inside Unity, is not one of the more difficult languages, like for example C++, which some other game engines might be using. C# is a much more forgiving version of the C languages, which basically means that you don't have to do stuff like memory management, which can cause your computer to crash if you don't do it properly. So just be aware that you do need to program in order to make video games, which I kind of expect you to know if you get into video games, because, you can't jump into, I want to learn how to make video games using a game engine and be completely unknowledgeable about the fact that you will have to program something. I mean, I'm pretty sure I just mocked a small portion of my viewers here. For the people sitting there thinking, okay, well, I did know that programming was a part of making video games, but programming kind of frightens me. I just want to point out that the way I'm going to be teaching the programming part, which is actually the scripting part that we're going to get into in the next episode, I'm going to teach it in a very simple and very understandable way. At least I like to think so, that I'm teaching it in a very comprehensive and understandable way, so that people who don't really feel comfortable programming can even follow. if that kind of makes sense. So just to mention the more specifics about what you're going to learn when it comes to programming in the next many lessons, I just want to point out that I am expecting everyone watching this video to be complete beginners. I don't expect you to know any sort of programming beforehand. I'm taking this as a person who wants to make video games, but they've never programmed before. So this is going to be an extremely beginner-friendly course to follow if you want to get started with game development, but you don't know anything, essentially. Like I've said plenty of times in this video, I don't expect you to know anything when it comes to game development. So with that said, in the next video, we will actually get started on doing some programming, which means that we will get into creating scripts inside Unity, and then just basically explaining what exactly a script consists of when we open it up inside our Visual Studio for the first time. Visual Studio is something you should have installed if you follow up my how to install Unity tutorial, which again is in the description. Visual Studio is going to be the main IDE that we're going to be using throughout making video games inside Unity. So in the next video, I'm just sort of going to dive into how a C# script looks like when you create it inside Unity and open it up inside Visual Studio for the first time, because there is some code in there as a default and it needs a little bit of explaining before you can continue. So that is going to be my goal for the next episode. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next video.